Hey, it's Dayvid Figler, and if you've been over to my house, you know I'm fascinated with Las Vegas history. So if you're anything like me, save Thursday, June 13th through Saturday, June 15th to head to the South Point Casino for the world's largest casino chip and memorabilia show. In fact, it's being touted as the greatest single-location collection of iconic artifacts and mementos, bringing casino history and memories to life. So go to www.ccgtcc.com for more information, and we'll see you at the South Point. Las Vegas is considered a pretty gay-friendly city right now, but it hasn't always been that way. Now that Pride Month is upon us, how did we get to this point? Today on CityCast Las Vegas, we'll talk with historian Dennis McBride. Dennis pretty much knows more about the long, unusual journey of our LGBTQ community than anyone. His book, Out of the Neon Closet, is essential on the topic, and we talk about some of the meaningful stories from there and also his personal experiences. It's Tuesday, June 11th. I'm Dayvid Figler, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. Dennis, is Las Vegas queer-friendly?
Well, Las Vegas is queer-friendly now, but in the years when I was coming out in the early 1970s and before, it absolutely was not. Las Vegas always promoted itself as this great libertine mecca for people to come here and do what they liked that they couldn't do back home, and that worked for people who were, white male Christians, more or less.
Straights.
Straights. But gay people, we were assaulted, we were beaten, we were arrested, we were jailed, we were fined, we were maligned. We were just really a community that lived even beyond the edges. We were beyond the pale. We were diseased. We were perverse. We were all of these things. And still, we formed our own little communities in our safe little spaces.
Right here in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
So what was the scene like in the 70s and 80s, Dennis?
In the 1970s, let's say, because there's a great line of demarcation between the 70s and the 80s, and that is AIDS, which we can talk about a little bit later on.
Sure.
But in the 1970s, it was more or less a party community, and there was no single cohesive community in any social or political sense. It was a bunch of smaller communities depending on which bar you went to. For example, there was the Le Café crowd, there was the Red Barn crowd, there was the Maxine's crowd. So
instead of what we think of like one geographic area, like I'm thinking of, very famously in San Francisco, there's the Castro district.
Yeah.
But here in Las Vegas, it was literally bar by bar were different scenes.
It was, and they were scattered all over. There was no gay ghetto until much later on.
Now, you mentioned to the Las Vegas Sun back in 2000 when you were interviewed there. Dennis, you've been around forever.
I have, for sure.
Quote unquote, trying to find information on the gay history in Southern Nevada before the 1970s is really difficult. What do we know about the gay history of our city prior to the emergence of these sort of bars that you talk about?
Well, let me start by saying this is sort of where the development of the gay community and my own coming out sort of cross. When I started coming out in the early 1970s, I, being a natural historian and researcher, wanted to find whatever information I could about the subject.
Sure.
Because that would help me understand who I was and what I was supposed to do next.
Very reasonable.
Yeah. And so when I started looking around, there was nothing. There were no resources. There wasn't anything except people who had been here for a very long time and themselves had experienced what passed as community. And before the 1970s, let's say before Stonewall in 1969.
The famous uprising in New York City.
Yeah, the Stonewall Rebellion, riots, uprising, whatever you want to call it, which was totally ignored by both papers here. The RJ, the Sun, they didn't report it. So that was something that even I didn't know about until I started doing a little bit of research. But the gay community before then in Las Vegas was really a story of persecution and prosecution When I started doing research in earnest, I went to the Nevada State Archives and hand searched through prison records, the Nevada State prison records, and that's where I found a great deal of our history. But these were from people who had been arrested and sent to jail for having sex with each other.
Yeah.
And their stories, you could extrapolate from there. Well, where did they go? Where did they meet? How did they meet? What did they do? This was about the extent of it, really. There were no written records to speak of except prison records and records from the Nevada State Hospital in Sparks, where people had been remanded for being gay. So really, that's all that there really was going on. There were not very many bars. There were bars that weren't designated as gay, but where gay people were welcome. For instance, a place called Tail of the Pup out in North Las Vegas, which I learned about having a gay clientele because a couple of people had been arrested there.
Oh.
And earlier even during the Second World War, out near what we call Five Points, Eastern Charleston, Fremont Street, where they all come together out there in that awful intersection.
Still awful today.
Yeah, still awful today. There was a bar called the Kit Kat. And that was a fabulous drag bar. And in fact, there are photographs of that bar. And it opened as a bar as just the Kit Kat in the late 1930s. And then that sort of morphed into a gay bar, gay-friendly bar.
Yeah.
And it was on the drag circuit out here. But
so interesting. And nowadays, if someone were to go in that area, obviously none of those bars are still around, but the old Blue Angel, the iconic statue that used to be on a motel nearby, sort of lords over that area. It was replaced there.
That seems kind of ironic, And there was a lot of gay things going on out there until finally Nellis Air Force Base complained because the soldiers that were stationed out there during the Second World War would spend a lot of their time, watching the drag shows in the Kit Kat bar, and so they shut it down. It became a Western bar and actually morphed into the Silver Dollar.
Oh, okay.
Which stood for many, many, many more years.
Yeah. I mean, it's very sad to me, Dennis, that in order to sort of reverse engineer the history of gay culture in our community, you have to start with prison records. And I think it should be mentioned that in Nevada, certain sexual acts, which were labeled, I think it was called the infamous crime against nature, was the name of the law itself, which was essentially two consenting adult people having sex in certain positions, was made unlawful, and people were actually arrested for it in Las Vegas prior to the time that we're talking about, before the 70s and 80s, and even
They
beyond.
were arrested into the 1990s.
Wow.
For that sort of thing. And it was used basically to persecute gay people, although, as you say, it applied to any kind of non-missionary sexual position, even for straight people.
But it seems like it was probably a little bit more enforced against the people
Yes,
who
it
were
was.
gay.
It absolutely was.
Now, you mentioned the difference between the 70s and the 80s was, of course, the horrors of the AIDS epidemic. How did Las Vegas deal with that in regards to how gay-friendly or unfriendly it was?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to back up just a little bit and talk about the late 1970s. It was the ACLU.
You're a great historian. I love that. Okay, let me have my context.
Yeah, it was the American Civil Liberties Union really first threw down the gauntlet for the gay community here in Las Vegas. September 20th, 1977, the ACLU held a great seminar in the Clark County Library over here on Maryland Parkway in Flamingo. And it was an invitation to the gay community to get off our bar stools and start organizing in some way. It was not something that was born out of the gay community. It came from the ACLU. And I remember in 1977, just prior to that, they went around and put flyers in all the bars, and you picked them up about this thing that was coming up and trying to raise some kind of political consciousness. And it was covered widely by the local press. The Valley Times, the Sun, the RJ, all had long articles. Ned Day covered it for, what was it, the RJ or the Sun? I can't remember.
The famous political reporter.
The famous political reporter. And they made it kind of sensational, but that was the point. It was to sort of shock people. And at one point they even quoted in a headline, "Mormons look out."
Mormons look out.
Mormons look out. And in the late 70s, 77, 78, 79, There was a bit of momentum starting to build in the community because there was also a population boom coming at that same time. And gay people from other parts of the country where their communities were more developed and where they'd been more activist came here and said, what the hell? This is Las Vegas. We've got to do something. And so they brought their experience with them. So we were building a political momentum, and there were some politicians like Joni Wines. She was the first politician I can think of, I can remember, who actually went into the gay community and appealed for votes. And others were just starting to do that. And so 79, 80, 81.
So a little momentum happening.
A little momentum was going on. And then the AIDS pandemic hit the country, 80, 81, 82. The first documented case in Las Vegas wasn't until March 1983. But this nascent community that we'd been building and the political momentum that we'd been building just actually came to an abrupt halt. I mean, the backlash of AIDS hit us about 1983, 84. And all that momentum that we'd been building, becoming visible, becoming outspoken, becoming politically relevant, just essentially came to an end. And the community had to turn inward and learn to take care of itself because nobody else was taking care of us. But we learned resolve, and we came out of that in 1993 when we worked to get the sodomy law repealed. And that was the first step toward the rejuvenation of the community and the real forward momentum that started.
Yeah, so that looks like it was the turning point.
It was.
Hey, it's Dayvid Figler, and if you know me, you know I am fascinated with Las Vegas history and have quite the collection of Vegas cool and kitsch. In fact, I have enough matchbooks alone to fill an empty casino pool. So if you're anything like me, save June 13th through the 15th to head to the South Point Casino for the world's largest casino chip and memorabilia show. It's an annual event put on by the nonprofit Casino Collectibles Association. In fact, it's being touted as the greatest single location collection of iconic artifacts and mementos, bringing casino history and memories to life. Things like ashtrays and dice, even squizzle sticks, just about anything a casino could put its name on. It's a unique opportunity to examine, buy, sell, trade, or authenticate casino collectibles. There'll be free gaming history seminars and a rare casino chip auction. Admission, it's only $10 on the first day, $5 the next day, and free on the final Saturday. Also, if you're a first responder, active military, or casino employee, you get in free with ID. So go to www.ccgtcc.com for more info, and we'll see you at the South Point. How was Las Vegas compared to the rest of the state? I mean, I'm making certain assumptions about the rurals sort of being in a denial, not necessarily being any pro or con, but how about Reno? Was Reno a better place for queer people during any of these timeframes?
No. Las Vegas was bigger and flashier. And I interviewed people. I've done, dozens and dozens of oral history interviews in the gay community in the 1990s and 2000s about that. And it just was never okay to be gay in Las Vegas. When the mafia was running things, they made sure that there were not going to be any gay bars anywhere close to the Strip during the years.
Well, I want to talk about the Strip, Dennis, because now we're in 1993. The very significant repeal of this law, symbolic or otherwise, it meant a lot to the queer community, obviously, by the way that you describe it. How are the hotels, the casinos, responding to the queer community around this time? I mean, do you have any stories where casinos on the Strip, for example, were not friendly to the queer community?
Well, I do. And I'll have to go back just a few years before the repeal of the Saturday law. In 1987, there was an effort to do a large public fundraising event for the gay community for AIDS. Mm-hmm. And it became, it actually happened, the Superstar Aid for AIDS benefit, 1987. And the people who were trying to put it on went from casino to casino, literally walking from casino to casino, trying to find a venue for this event because they wanted it to be on the Strip and they wanted it to include entertainers that were performing on the Strip at that time. And it was to raise money for AIDS of Nevada, which had been founded a few years before. And just as an opportunity for the straight community to show its support for, especially the entertainment community. And nobody would let them come until they got to the Stardust. And one of the Stardust executives was a closeted gay man, and he allowed them to do it. But it took a long time, and they all turned them down because they didn't want AIDS in the casinos. They didn't want gay people in the casinos, but the Stardust said yes.
And you'd imagine, and I don't think that I'm profiling, but there has always been a large gay contingent within the entertainment community. And certainly probably some of the first people to really be out and proud in the country come from the entertainment industry, Broadway, etc.
Well, out and proud is probably not the best description of it, because we had people who performed here in Las Vegas who were gay. I mean, Liberace, of course, is the first one who comes to mind, and Siegfried and Roy, Rusty Warren, Johnny Ray, Noel Coward in the 50s, These were people who are now all understood to be gay, have been gay, but they could not be out. They couldn't be out anywhere, and they especially couldn't be out in Las Vegas because Las Vegas is where they really built their reputations. And so it's a dichotomy that hasn't really been looked at, where you have, I guess an analogy would be African-American entertainers who were allowed to entertain on the Strip, but they weren't allowed to eat in the restaurants, to walk through the casinos, to stay in the hotels. Gay people, if they had been out and proud, they would likely have been arrested, frankly. And that happened once. Christine Jorgensen performed here in the 1950s to standing room only audiences. And she was warned that if she showed up on the streets on the Strip of Las Vegas dressed as a woman, she would be arrested.
Wow.
Well,
that brings us very rapidly to a source of, I'm going to say it literally, pride. And we're celebrating Pride Month nationwide. Though Las Vegas has a weird twist on it. We typically celebrate Pride in October, not in June. Why is that, Dennis?
Oh, well, the very first Pride that we had wasn't even called Pride. It was in May 1983. It was called the Human Rights Seminar. And it was held here on the UNLV campus in the Moyer Student Union. And it was all indoors, and it included lectures.
That doesn't sound as fun as Pride parades, Dennis.
No, it wasn't. I mean, and it was after the repeal of the sodomy law, really, that the gay pride celebrations became the vehicle by which the community, the gay community, the queer community, could go out right in front of the straight community and have fabulous floats and fabulous costumes, and everybody who supported us riding in cars, like Mayor Goodman was, he was Grand Marshal one year. Even in those days, Pride was celebrated all over the calendar. We had a Pride celebration in April that was snowed out. In fact,
funny.
We had them in June when it was so hot that you couldn't stand anything. They did them in August. They finally settled on October, which is really the end of our summer and also coincides with National Coming Out Month, which is October.
Okay, so we're not really doing a disservice not celebrating it as much in June as other places do. We kind of have our own.
We do, and they've settled on October, although Henderson has had its Pride. They had its Pride here in June, so we've got two Prides going on now, and a Pride in Pahrump.
A Pride in Pahrump. I love it. Over the hump in Pahrump with pride.
Yes.
So, Dennis, what do you think the future looks like for the queer community in Las Vegas?
This is a very difficult point in our history. I mean, the backlash going on across the country is severe and vengeful, worse than anything I've seen. And I've seen a lot of backlash when we've achieved something really important for the community and then a backlash immediately. This is somehow different, I think, and it's just swept across the country, but it hasn't reached Nevada or it's gone around Nevada. I'm really not sure. We have a Republican governor who is a Trumper, and
to a degree. I think he tries to needle the thread quite a bit on that.
That's the thing. I mean, Governor Lombardo is at this point a cipher because he was presented with, 3 pieces of queer-friendly legislation in the last session. He, 2 of them passed and he signed it, and then he vetoed a third one, which I thought was the most important of the 3. Do you
remember which one he vetoed?
He vetoed the one that would prevent Nevada from prosecuting physicians or anyone who facilitates gender-affirming treatment.
Broadly,
yeah. If they come from another state. It's the abortion thing, kind of, in another analogy.
How one state treats another state's people.
Right. If a physician comes from a state and a patient comes from a state where it's illegal and they come to Nevada and do it, it's possible that they could be pursued and prosecuted in the state they came from.
Yeah.
Which people who perform abortions, they can't do that. I mean,
sure.
we protect them, but we won't protect physicians. So I thought that was, out of the 3, he chose to sign the bills, passing 2 of the ones that are safest and less likely to upset his red compatriots in other states.
Interesting.
Well,
but Dennis, let's end it this way, and I'd like to try on a little cheerier note. We've been through a real emotional roller coaster with the community here, and there's even more to talk about, and I know you talk about a lot of it in your book. But we're in Pride Month, so let me ask you just this fun question. What do you love most about Pride, or what are your favorite things about how Las Vegas celebrates Pride?
My favorite things about Pride Las Vegas is how the scope of it has broadened away, honestly, from just gay people to involve all sorts of different people and all sorts of different supporters. It's become, certainly Pride is still called Pride, and that's the focus of it, but it's become a celebration of pride in general, of acceptance in general, of tolerance in general, of the wider community than just gay people. It's still, that's the focus, that's the origin, that's the point. But I like that everybody gets in on the act and enjoys everything together.
Well, Dennis McBride, thank you so much for all the work that you do and joining us here on CityCast Las Vegas. If somebody in the future or even right now wanted to check out the history of the gay community in Las Vegas, you have some stuff over at UNLV.
Oh, there's absolutely one place to go. Special Collections Department at the UNLV Library. I established the Las Vegas Gay LGBTQ Plus Archives there in 1984 and have been adding to it ever since. And It's a tremendous resource for anybody who wants to know anything about the history of gay in Las Vegas.
That's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, you should go tell a friend. I'm always telling you to tell your friends, but trust me, your friends will thank you. You can also rate our show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Till then, everybody stay lucky.